Going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. Clerk, will you call the roll?
Corliss.
Here.
Halliburton.
Here.
Rouse.
Here.
Nash.
Here.
Steggs.
Here.
Willits. Here. All present.
Thank you. First up, we've got the team from OPA here with us today for the first annual report. I want to just thank you in advance for the work that you've done to organize the office, professionalize the office, begin to collect data, set out what more data needs to be collected. And then today we'll see the first report and some recommendations moving forward. So welcome.
Good morning. Good morning, Madam Mayor and council members. It is a pleasure to be here with you today and share our OPA semi-annual report. It's kind of odd. It's a semi-annual report, but really it's the report on 2024. So it feels like an annual report. So maybe we'll call it a combination. Lexi Whitmore, our data analyst, and I will both be presenting today. Lexi will present her data from 2024 first, and then I will return to provide an update on the use of deadly force incident reports, highlight our website updates, share our community engagements, report on our findings, make recommendations, and outline our priorities going forward. Hopefully you've had some coffee. The themes we will be speaking to today center on the importance of de-escalation and effective communication, access to robust data, and enhanced analytics to support data-driven policing. Lexi?
Good morning, Madam Mayor and City Council members. My name is Lexi Whitmore, and I'm the data analyst for the Office of Police Accountability.
Madam Mayor, sorry to interrupt. Do we have screens up here?
On this side, we do have screens.
Great.
I think back here is just the agenda. Are you able to see as well?
We can just do it in here. I didn't know if they were popping up.
Can everybody see screen? Okay, great.
Great.
Today, I'll be sharing OPA's 2024 year-end data reports with you. I'll be covering data on OPA complaints and contacts, internal affairs investigations by the Boise Police Department, use of force, and data on use of deadly force incidents from 2015 to 2024. Please feel free to stop me at any point if you have questions, and I'll be pausing on the slides to give extra time to view those data visualizations. OPA had a total of 135 contacts in 2024. 89 of these were informational, where OPA provided information to a complainant on BPD policies and procedures or connected them with appropriate resources. 39 contacts fell under the definition of a complaint, which is an allegation that meets jurisdictional requirements and, if proven true, would constitute a violation of BPD policy or the law. We also had 6 use of deadly force incidents come in for investigation and 1 commendation for an officer. Let's look more closely at what types of complaints OPA received in 2024 and what determinations were made. Complaints related to duty performance were the most common, with 23 complaints, followed by complaints about demeanor or rudeness with 9 complaints total. In the majority of the complaints, the officer in question was exonerated, and a determination of exonerated means that an alleged act did occur, but was justified, lawful, and/or proper. OPA did not have any sustained complaints in 2024. We did have 3 complaints that fell outside of OPA's 90-day time limit. And as a note, our director is able to waive that time limit if extenuating circumstances exist.
I've got a question. I might have missed it, and if I did, I'm sorry. The word complaint is often confusing because people call and they think they're making a complaint, but there's an actual definition to the word complaint. Could you differentiate between the two?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. So a complaint has to fall under our jurisdictional requirements, and it's also defined as an allegation that, if proven true, would actually violate BPD policy or the law.
So that's different than that. So these numbers are different than the numbers of people that you have calling your office
Correct.
with
So,
what normal people would call a complaint.
yes.
Okay, great. Thanks.
So some of these we do define as informational, where we provide extra information on what the policies might be, or direct someone to a different resource if perhaps they're calling from outside the city or about another agency.
Thanks. I think that clarification is helpful for the public as we talk about this. And for us, we always tend to remind ourselves that that's what, in this case, complaint is a very technical term.
Yes, definitely. And this current visualization only shows the outcome for complaints.
Thanks.
The Boise Police Department's Office of Internal Affairs also conducts investigations into citizen complaints and any issues identified internally. Last year, BPD conducted a total of 57 investigations, and for those that have been completed, the investigations took an average of 58 days to be completed. 22 investigations were initiated by the department itself, and 19 were triggered by citizen complaints. 16 were inquiries that did not rise to the level of a formal complaint, which we defined previously. Here you can see the types of allegations BPD investigated and the determinations made for their completed investigations. Some investigations from 2024 are still ongoing and are excluded from this particular visualization. The most common categories for allegations were performance of duty and demeanor or rudeness. These are the same top categories that we saw in OPA. However, unlike OPA, allegations were sustained in over half of the completed investigations, 15 out of 28 cases. I'd also like to provide extra context on the cases labeled criminal conduct. This was the designation given to these cases by BPD within the internal affairs software, but criminal charges were not filed in either of these cases. OPA has reviewed them, and the infractions involved are relatively minor. They don't raise any concerns for us on a larger scale. Next, I'll be sharing data on use of force, but first I'd like to discuss the different ways that force can be counted. As an example, let's imagine a situation like the one in this graphic on the left, where two officers are on a scene with 3 subjects. The officers use force against all 3 subjects here, and the types of force used include hand control, canine bite, OC spray, a taser, and a vehicle. Some of these types of force, like hand control or OC spray, are used multiple times in this example. In this scenario, force could be counted as 1 force event, 2 officers using force, 3 subjects experiencing force, 5 types of force, or 7 applications of force. So you can see there are many different ways to count force that are all accurate in their own way. So that's why it's important to define our terms a little bit here. In this presentation specifically, we will be counting force events, which is the most high-level way of counting, and force applications, which is the most detailed way of counting. I'll discuss data on force events first, followed by data applications. There were 151 of those force events in 2024. To break that number down further, 65 of these events were physical use of force, where an officer used their hands or discharged a weapon, for example. 86 events were shows of force, which refers to an officer pointing but not discharging a weapon like a taser or firearm. Last year, there were about 141,000 calls for service to the Boise Police Department. Only 0.05% of calls resulted in a physical use of force, while only 0.06% resulted in a show of force. As a note, this data was last updated by OPA on February 20th. Because BPD's reporting deadline for officers is still coming up at the end of February, there may be a few force events not accounted for here. BPD also started tracking show of force in March of 2024, so the show of force data is for that partial year. We also looked at what types of calls most frequently involve a force event. This visualization shows those rates for physical force, and the next slide will show percentages for shows of force. For readability, I have included only call types with a rate higher than 1% and selected call types with lower rates. The call types with the highest rates were fight with a weapon at 6.9% and armed robbery with 4.35%. I'd also like to highlight some of those call types with the lowest rate of physical force. In 2024, only 0.04% of welfare checks involved a use of force, and that figure was even lower for traffic stops at 0.02%. For show of force, nearly all the call types with higher percentages involved a violent crime or a weapon. In particular, rape, stabbing, shots fired, and man with a gun call types all had show of force rates over 6%. On the lowest end, we find that only 0.03% of welfare checks and traffic stops involved a show of force last year. Now let's take a look at the reasons officers gave for using force. Now for this data, we will be counting individual applications of force rather than force events. To refresh your memory with another simple example, imagine two officers both restrain a suspect and one officer uses a taser. This would be one force event, but 3 applications of force. So that's why we see a higher number here. In 2024, there were 250 applications of force. For shows of force specifically, the presence of a weapon and disobeying officer commands were the most common reasons given for applying force. For use of force, physical resistance and disobeying officer commands were the most common reasons cited. We've also analyzed the types of force used. Pointing of a firearm was the most common force application last year, with 115 instances. Again, that number is for pointing of a firearm. Firearms were actually discharged 7 times in 2024. The second most common type of force was soft empty hand control, which is the use of bare hands without a weapon to hold or restrain a suspect. This type of force was recorded 53 times. In contrast, hard empty hand was employed 7 times. And hard empty hand refers to blows such as punches or kicks without the officer using a weapon or tool. The third most common type of force was taser red dot, which refers to a taser, aiming of a taser so that red dots appear on a subject's body. We can also see that tasers were aimed at suspects about twice as often as they were discharged, 26 times versus 10. Let's now take a closer look at use of deadly force incidents. OPA tracks are a variety of contributing and mitigating factors related to use of deadly force incidents, and I'll be sharing some statistics on those. This data covers use of deadly force incidents from 2015 to 2024, and most of this data I'll be sharing is not readily available in our databases, so our team went back through incidence reports from these last 10 years to compile this data. BPD had 38 use of deadly force incidents in this time period, 6 of which occurred last year in 2024. In 58% of the deadly force incidents, the suspect did not survive. We also looked at what weapons were present at these incidents. In 87% of the deadly force incidents, The suspect was either armed or was driving a vehicle. In the majority of cases, that weapon was a gun. Additionally, 2 suspects were armed with BB guns that are made to look like real firearms, which makes them difficult to distinguish from an actual gun. I also wanted to note that in one incident, a single suspect was armed with a knife, hammer, and pry bar, so that rightmost data point there is a single incident. In terms of criminal history, 74% of suspects had a criminal record as either an adult in 27 cases or a juvenile in 1 case. At the time of a deadly force incident, over a third of the suspects were on parole and 2 had known warrants out for their arrest. "50% of suspects had either a confirmed or likely history of reported mental health challenges. In 60% of cases, suspects had a confirmed or likely history of reported substance use. In terms of housing status, the majority of suspects were housed at the time of a deadly force incident. That concludes our 2024 data reports. I'd be happy to answer any remaining questions about the data before I pass things back to Director McKay.
Madam Mayor.
Yeah.
On these last 2 slides, so I think I can make an assumption that there's probably some actually overlay between these, so that somebody has a criminal background, maybe mental health challenges, and substance abuse issues all within the same one. Am I reading that correctly?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Halliburton, yes, that is correct. We do display these a little more in aggregate so that it can't be narrowed down to a specific person's information, but there definitely is overlap in some of these cases.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then a couple of slides, I think it was the one where you showed the use of force and the show of force for the types of crimes. Can you go back to that one? It's probably like
Yes,
5 slides back. There we go.
this is use of force, and I can pivot
What-
to show of force as
One
well.
more forward.
Let's see, this one, is that
Oh,
correct?
Nope, I think you showed it already. It's the one where we got pink and then blue on top on a vertical column graph. That's the one. So if I'm looking at this, what I could probably say is that if the police show up and somebody has a weapon, 60 times they're showing force, and almost every single time, or close to every time, somebody's dropping that weapon and they're not actually having to use force at that point. The 60 and the 7. Am I reading that one correctly?
So I don't have stats on that specific scenario if the subject is putting down the weapon, but one would assume that they were able to gain compliance with just a show of force in the majority of those cases.
And then when we look over to the next one and the police officers show up to a fight, there's a pretty strong chance that they're going to have to use force in this situation. So like, even if somebody has a weapon, there's maybe a less chance than if they show up and there's a fight going on.
As this is single year data, I don't want to extrapolate
Sure.
too much and say it's predictive, but I think your assumptions are fair.
Yeah, it's just really, really interesting to think about it from an officer perspective of what you're showing up to and what is a very, very likely, at least from 1 year perspective, but I take your point seriously, that there's a really strong chance that there's going to have to be a use of force for a particular thing. And it makes sense if you were thinking of a fight where people's, blood pressures are already up, they're already aggravated, they're already interacting with each other. Officers are probably going to have to pull people apart. But just interesting to see the types of things that people will show up to and the potential likelihood that a use of force will have to happen. Thanks for the presentation.
Thank you so much.
Madam Mayor, thank you. Hey, thanks for the great presentation. Lots of good information. I want to go back to the beginning where we talked about OPA versus the department's investigations. And I think this would be really helpful with, well, I'm having a great morning. Hi. All right, got the glasses on. Okay. I want to have a better understanding, and I think for the public to have a better understanding of what determines an OPA compliant determination, and then what determines when the department investigates, because these are 2 dramatically different results. And I think that'd be very helpful for the public to understand.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Willits, thank you for the question. So we do use the same terminology as BPD for determination. So exonerated, sustained, not sustained. I believe part of the difference in the complaints we receive and the outcomes is community awareness. So this is just my personal theory, but I feel that people that have more serious complaints may not be as familiar with us and may go straight to the police department at this time. We do thoroughly evaluate all the complaints that we receive, and we also review the investigations that BPD does. Nicole will speak to this a little bit later, but we so far have found a lot of integrity in the investigations BPD does.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things that would be helpful for me to understand is when OPA gets involved and when the department gets involved and how those two intersect.
So we do, as per our statute, forward the complaints to BPD as well as we are investigating them. So they do see the complaints that we receive as long as they meet jurisdictional requirements. And they may, if they find it necessary, open their own department investigation. On this slide, you can see that a few of the cases that they opened were actually OPA referrals.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Madam Mayor. Lexi, thank you so much. This is really, really great analytical work that you provided for us today. I just have a couple of clarifications. We talked about the 2024 percentage of calls and the different types that came in. Did we have the total number of calls for 2024?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Corliss, thank you. We do have the total number of calls. It's around 141,000. I believe the exact figure is 141,636 calls.
Yeah, just to get a rough estimate of that total number of calls. This is great. And then on the last slide, when we talked about, excuse me, mental health challenges and substance use, are these self-reporting when we use deadly force that they've had it? Are they saying, hey, I do have a mental health challenge? And is that, I guess, the definition of that? And same with the substance use.
So we primarily refer back to the critical incident task force reports and any documentation that came along with that. So sometimes you do see interviews with family members there or someone who knew the suspect personally. Sometimes we have records from BPD's behavioral health team that may be aware of interacting with this person frequently. So we do have some subjects where it is unknown, but sometimes there is a clear documented history of that struggle.
Okay, Madam Mayor, one more follow-up. Lexi, so on the mental health and the substance use, it might not be at that incident. They could have had prior. So it's including all of it.
Yes,
I just want to make sure I'm understanding that correctly.
Yes, and sometimes for substance use specifically, there may be a talk screen of that incident. It just varies what kind of documentation we have for each incident.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Appreciate it.
Would you go back to the number of calls that the office received last year? Oh, that was police department calls. Okay, because I was doing the math. That didn't seem possible. Okay, great. Thank you. This is helpful.
And if you'd like to see the calls for OPA, OPA here had 135 either calls or in-person contacts or through our form on the website.
Madam Mayor, if I could one more time. This is such a great presentation. I wish that I could say that I had gotten the same presentation all 6 years I've been here on council, because we would have a little bit more data to kind of look and see what's going on. So I'm really excited to see how we can use this going forward. One of the things that I think will be interesting to see is how we can compare some of that data to some other cities and to see if we have any outliers or if we're relatively consistent with some of these things. It seems relatively hard to do that with just a set of year data, but that might be something for us to think about in the future, of being able to take this information and then being able to compare it to some similar cities that we see, just to see if there's anything that seems like maybe they're slightly out of normal that might be able to help us identify a specific kind of training or something like that we can use. But again, so great to have it this year. And I look forward to, further years where we can build the data out a little bit more.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Halliburton, thank you for the kind comments. We definitely are looking into some comparisons either with national benchmarking or other cities. The challenge there, as you may have seen from my slide about how data is counted, we have to find other cities or jurisdictions that are first publishing their data and then making clear how they are counting and what methods they're using. So we are definitely on the lookout for those opportunities.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I'll pass things back to Director McKay.
Following up on Lexi's data on the use of deadly force, I wanted to provide you with an update on OPA's use of deadly force investigative reports. There were 6 use of deadly force incidents in 2024. OPA has completed the review of 2 incidents, the April 2024 incident involving Mr. Mulqueen and the March incident at St. Al's. The April incident report is posted on our website, and the March incident will be posted in the near future. We are currently working on the January incident involving Mr. Gaver and anticipate a posting date by the end of March. The 3 remaining incidents are currently under investigation by the Critical Incident Task Force. They range in date from September to November, and they are not yet ready for our review. And as you can see, there are no deadly force incidents to date in 2025. I wanted to share some of the things that OPA looks for in its review of use of deadly force incidents. I will give you a moment to read these, and then I will highlight just a few. When feasible, we look for adequate communication, both officer to officer and officer to involved individual, contact and pre-planning, and contingency planning. Contingency planning allows officers to be prepared and coordinate for a number of variables. We look to see if officers appropriately held and executed their designated roles. For example, one officer may be assigned to be on lethal, one may be assigned to be on less lethal, one is communicator, and one is the supervisor. We review whether all appropriate and necessary de-escalation and less lethal tools were utilized before resorting to the use of lethal force. Appropriate and necessary are dictated by the time and opportunity and the resources that are available to the officers during the incident. For example, is it appropriate to call the behavioral health team? Is this an event that would warrant calling the special operations unit? In the report writing, we look for a sufficiently detailed description of the officer's decision-making process, tactical approach, and use of force, not justification. We are also looking whether there was a critical review by the supervisor, and if a supervisor finds the report incomplete, did the supervisor return the report for further development? Finally, we looked at the number of critical incidents that officers have been in and examined for any patterns, concerns, or needs for additional training. I do want to note that the Department of Internal Affairs has computer software that automatically tracks uses of force, shows of force, and involvement in critical incidents. So we have a system that has been demonstrated to be working, because when BPD gets notified of this and we determine it on our side as well, and we can collaborate on it, we're all on the same page, aware, and having a robust discussion on it. Because de-escalation is something we review in not only use of deadly force, but also in our incident reviews, I wanted to take a moment to highlight a BPD policy change that went into effect April 1st of 2024 regarding de-escalation. While this slide does not capture the entirety of the policy, I have highlighted a few additional tactics officers are now expected to employ when feasible. This new policy does an excellent job of articulating clear and robust standards and is consistent with national standards. Of note is the designation of roles, verbal persuasion in addition to commands, and the option to withdraw when warranted. What we are seeing in our reviews regarding the designation of roles is that holding a role allows an officer to focus on specific responsibility, and it increases the likelihood of a positive outcome because the benefits of each role are realized. These are the policy standards that will govern the review of 3 use of deadly force incidents that occurred after April 1st of 2024, and our reports will reflect our review based on this new standard. Okay, this is something we're really excited about. Our website updates. Many thanks to Jen Halliburton, who helped us update and expand our website. Our goal was to increase transparency into our work and not only improve the ease of access to the information, but to provide more information. I'll highlight just a few things that are new and encourage you to take a look when time allows. For readability, we changed some terminology, which is also better for translation, and added a means to request OPA attend an organization's meeting to discuss our office's roles, processes, and civil oversight work. We now also have a universal naming convention for all past critical incidents / use of deadly force incident reports. They are organized by the date the event occurred and reference the name of the involved individual. This makes finding a particular report much easier. The reports are also now embedded into the website with the option to download it. This is more accessible, secure, and user-friendly. We've added an FAQ section, and we will be adding our data analysis soon, which will include the graphics Lexi presented today. Next, I will share what we have learned from the community, our investigations and audits. This will include strengths and opportunities for BPD's policing and recommendations going forward. Since our meeting last October, we have had the pleasure of meeting with many exceptional community leaders and who provide critical support to members of our community. I have included some of them here. This year, our outreach efforts have largely been focused on organizations that serve some of the most vulnerable populations of our city, those experiencing homelessness, individuals struggling with mental illness, and victims of abuse, which represent a high frequency of calls for service. Our goal in meeting with these organizations is threefold. Number one, to learn. We seek to understand the vital work these organizations do, how they coordinate with other service providers, and the ways in which they and the individuals they serve interact with BPD. Our second goal is to share. We introduce ourselves and our office, explain our role, and offer to be a resource going forward to facilitate communication and collaboration. Finally, our third goal is to bridge gaps. By relaying feedback back to BPD leadership, we help identify areas where additional support or coordination may be needed, ensuring that the lines of communication remain open for the continued well-being of our community. Through these discussions, I've gained an even deeper appreciation for the dedication, passion, and impact of these community leaders. Here's what stands out. They are passionate and driven. These individuals are deeply committed to their work and frequently innovating to meet the growing needs of the community, even with limited budgets. They are generous with their time, energy, and resources. They not only support the community members, but also uplift fellow organizations, fostering a network of collaboration. There is rising demand. More people than ever are seeking their services, placing increased pressure on the organization to expand and adapt. They are essential to community well-being. Individually and collectively, these organizations play a vital role in keeping Boise a healthy place to live. We have a strong partnership with BPD with these organizations. Overall, they report positive interactions with BPD officers, valuing the collaboration and responsiveness of law enforcement. And finally, a commitment to problem solving. They appreciate the willingness of BPD officers and leadership to work alongside them in assessing challenges as they arise. It is evident that these organizations serve as force multipliers in supporting individuals who are unhoused, struggling with mental health, or experiencing abusive situations. Their work, in concert with BPD's proactive community policing efforts by officers, thank you so much, by officers and their dedicated behavioral health coordinators, helps Boise maintain a level of public safety and stability that many neighboring communities continue to struggle with. By keeping people housed and connected to services, we reduce unnecessary law enforcement interactions, ensure a safer community for both officers and the community. This collaborative approach strengthens Boise's social fabric, reinforcing a shared commitment to community where everyone has the opportunity to live with dignity, security, and support. One moment, please. And thank you, Councilmember Halliburton. We are a year and a half into our work, and here are some of the things that we have learned. Through the investigation of complaints and audits, we consistently see officers on patrol engaging in professional and respectful policing, even when it is challenging. I want to note that when we first started, one of the things I brought to you is seeing a complaint trend, and in viewing some of the OBVs, the on-body videos for some interactions between the community and police, we didn't see this consistently. This is a really positive change that we are seeing consistently across the board. Impressive professionalism with the way BPD is interacting with the community. Through our audits, we see integrity in BPD's Office of Internal Affairs investigations, which includes investigations of complaints, use of force, and department-initiated cases. OPA has reviewed all of these for 2024 and did not contest any findings, though in some cases we made recommendations to BPD for additional training and coaching for individual officers. BPD has agreed with our findings and incorporated our recommendations. We have attended training, both classroom and scenario-based, and many thanks to BPD for allowing us to come in and participate in those. The scenario-based training simulates potential situations to prepare officers for high-stress incidents. It was enlightening to see firsthand in the scenario-based training the number of pivotal decision points each officer encounters through the dynamic exercise. We found the training comprehensive, relevant, and well executed, and led by a highly skilled team. It is clear that BPD is committed to high-quality training in both content, cadence, and practice. This live action training is critical for officers to practice role responsibilities, planning for contingencies, and critical decision making in real time with changing scenarios and environments. We see officers who excel in communication and de-escalation and could be peer leaders to the force in this area. We are currently reviewing a report out of Arizona, excuse me, that measured the effectiveness of a program in which officers nominated peers who were considered top de-escalators in the department. They studied the ideas and techniques used by these officers, incorporated them into their curriculum, and utilized the top de-escalators as peer instructors. We will discuss this with BPD leadership going forward. One of our earliest recommendations in the use of deadly force reports was for robust and consistent training that emphasizes slow tactics, de-escalation, effective communication, and the use of less lethal tools during high-risk events when feasible. Feasible means the scene is secure and there is an opportunity. This opportunity can be very short and thus limited, or if officers are successful in slowing the situation down, an opportunity for de-escalation can be lengthy. Once a firearm is pulled on an officer, for example, that opportunity ceases. As you have heard previously from Chief Dennison, this emphasis on slow tactics, de-escalation, and effective communication is also a high priority of his. We still see in our review of the use of force incidents opportunities for more regular use of effective communication. This includes the designation of a communicator, and this is the important part, and the discipline by the other officers to allow the designated communicator to speak and not add to the commands. It is also the appropriate use of words, tone, and repetition with the communication. As stated earlier, BPD has already updated its policy on de-escalation, and it sets a high standard. BPD is actively and effectively training to that policy. We recognize it will take time to see that translate across the board into everyday policing and look forward to seeing its impact. In the meantime, OPA recommends that BPD emphasize effective communication by continuing to engage in consistent scenario-based training, require briefings to reinforce best practices, reinforce their updated report writing policy with the officers as well as the supervisors, and accountability when that standard is not met. Accountability can include retraining, more education, or something more formal in the term by way of findings. I have referenced effective communication several times, and I want to share with you what that means in the context of policing. BPD's Office of Internal Affairs recently shared an excellent article that outlines a lot of what effective communication is and is not. I'll share just a few highlights from the article written by George T. Williams, who is a well-known and regarded national and international police trainer, that captures some of the challenges and missed opportunities that we have seen in our review of use of force. To start off with, why are we shouting? Well, officers are trained to yell to gain attention when they perceive danger or they cannot achieve compliance. Why we should stop yelling? It's best for everyone, the involved individuals, community members, and officers. What's the problem? Repetitive yelling is ineffective. It can result in conflicting orders by multiple officers. For example, don't move, show me your hands, get on the ground, do it now. Imagine that all coming at the same time to the same individual. Measuring compliance becomes more complicated because we've had so many commands. What the suspect perceives with the yelling, perhaps by multiple officers, is anger, frustration, lack of control, lack of coordination, fear by the officer. Why it doesn't work? Frightened people experience increased chaotic thinking and are slow to regain logic and react. Emotional states are not quieted by yelling, and emotional individuals simply may not be capable of regulating their own emotions, and emotions are contagious. So what's the solve? Using yelling as a limited tactical tool is the solve, not something that is sustained due to non-compliance. One bark, one talk, then observe. OPA recognizes that in high-risk, dynamic situations, yelling can be a natural, instinctive response. We've seen that with the use of profanity at times in some of our reports on critical incidents. Restraining from yelling and allowing the designated communicator to speak requires training and discipline. The way officers develop this discipline is through dynamic, live-action, scenario-based training. Going forward, OPA will be looking to measure the impact of effective communication and de-escalation and analyze its effect on the use of force, and particularly the use of deadly force. Finally, we're going to just review OPA's priorities going forward for fiscal year 2026. In addition to the work we have presented today, OPA will focus on the following priorities in the coming year. Number one, to support a safe city for everyone, support the prioritization of de-escalation and effective communication and policing, track data, and measure outcomes. We are doing this already, but we hope to lean in and get a little more detailed and get a little bit further into our work. Number two, To support transparency and accountability, support police data system improvements, continue to develop data analytics, recommend data-driven policing, and post findings. The current data systems used to store and access BPD data are challenging to view, utilize, and validate. It is also challenging to connect BPD's data to other sources of data. Migrating to a system that allows the software products to, quote unquote, speak to each other would be highly beneficial to both BPD and OPA. It would increase OPA's analytic capabilities and would be highly beneficial to both, it would increase OPA's analytic capabilities and reporting. For BPD, it would better enable data-driven policing as well as create efficiencies in work processes. These efficiencies, in turn, should free up officers to be out in the community more. Finally, this office supports the increased detective staffing in BPD's special victims and domestic violence units to meet increasing caseloads. This work is critical to the safety and well-being of our community. Improved software systems will also enhance the policing of this specialized work. Finally, with the staffing of the third behavioral health team anticipated by this summer, we are particularly looking forward to a data analysis in the coming years for the calls related to mental health checks and crisis and welfare calls. And with that, Madam Mayor and council members, we thank you for your time and attention, and I'm happy to stand for questions.
Madam Mayor, I'll kick us off. So just one question, I guess, to start off about some terminology. I'm familiar with de-escalation. I think I know what slow tactics are. Can you talk a little bit more about the difference between slow tactics and de-escalation and what that means to the general public?
You bet. Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council Member Halliburton. The way I view this is think about a scenario in which officers respond to a call for service. When you show up, how do you present yourself? If it's an individual, there's no known weapon, there's no suspected weapon. Are you coming up in an appropriate level? I think back to the very first critical incident we reviewed, and the officer showed up and he met the individual where that person was. Calm communication, offers to how to problem solve the reason for the call, which was a stalled vehicle. It quickly turned into something else. But can you show up, be at an appropriate level of volume, commands, conversation, and can you look to problem solve that? Of course, making sure that the scene is secure. That's your highest priority. So de-escalation to me is you get to a situation and you think, how can I bring this down? I can bring this down by all sorts of things. Communication, the tone of your voice, what you say, how you say it. Slow tactics is slowing everything down. What you need for a use of force, what you might have as backup, what you are doing in the moment to cause everybody to calm down.
Yeah, so maybe, for example, if I was showing up or if a police officer was showing up and they knew that the situation was tense, would be calling another officer that was more specialized in communication or mental health. Is that what we think of as far as a slow tactic, trying to get the right person there, or is that a different area?
Madam Mayor and Council Member Halliburton, I'm not sure it's that clean cut in terms of what we do and what we call it. Certainly, that is absolutely part of the process to ensure that you have the appropriate resources there. And if you are successful in slowing it down, and that could be taking the time ahead of time to make contact, to pre-plan, to plan for contingencies with your fellow officers, and then approaching the individual if you have that opportunity. If you have an individual who shows up with a weapon, all of that goes away because you've got to secure the scene and you've got to make sure that you're safe. But if it's an individual and there's not an immediate threat, that's when you have time to make contact, pre-plan, call in the resources that may be available to you at that time. It could be a canine, it could be the special operations unit behavioral health team. Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. And then just a couple of other questions. one, I'm so excited about your team's job, what you've done as far as talking about training and professionalism, but also very proud of our police department, both our past chief and our current chief, and the emphasis on professionalism and training and really getting folks, exploring all different options. So, props to both teams there. I'm wondering with the amount of with some of the data that we saw, and again, understand it was just for 1 year, and some of the overlap with prior criminal convictions, I'm wondering if there was any recommendations that also addressed what we're seeing as sort of an overlap of high uses of force and high incidents of people with either criminal background, sometimes on probation still, or if there was any recommendations related to that.
Thank you for that question, Madam Mayor and Councilmember Halliburton. I would say we have a two-prong approach to that. With Lexi's increasing application of her skills to the data, we do hope to get in to do some more robust data analysis on that. And number two, in our investigations going forward, Lexi mentioned that we do have access to the critical incident task force reports, and that gives us some information. We will be asking our investigator, when the information is not readily available in those critical incident task force, to do some additional research or interviewing to see what kind of additional information we can find that can help us identify any gaps in the system or any one of these factors that we can influence upstream, so to speak, and try and influence and reduce the number of critical incidents.
Great, thank you. It's so nice to be able to address everything that we have the capacity and the power to do within our own departments. I think one of the challenges sometimes is when we run into incidents where we really need partnership with some other organizations as well. And it could be, the Ada County Sheriff's Department or Idaho Department of Corrections or Meridian Police Department. And my hope is that as our police department continues to do this training, this professionalism, continues to work with you, that we are able to build some partnerships with these other overlapping resources that may be linked to some of the data that we're seeing and that we could be working together with to address some of those issues. So that's one of the things that I hope. I know we can only control what we can, but I hope that some of this encourages partnerships with the organizations that you're reaching out to and some of our partners out there to kind of address some of these outline issues. But again, thank you so much.
Madam Mayor and Councilmember Halliburton, thank you. I will add to that by saying with some of our critical incidents or use of deadly force reports, we have had opportunities to work side by side with other agencies. And I think that's been a useful exercise for BPD and also this office to examine when is it appropriate for our officers to remain on scene to assist, and when is it appropriate for us to withdraw when those other agencies have appropriate resources at the scene. So it's a good exercise all the way around.
Madam Mayor, Director McKay, thank you so much for this information today. It's helpful to start digging down and to seeing not only the data, but what's coming out of that data, what OPA is recommending, that additional training, and also looking at potentially using or employing different data systems. I had a question, if we could go back on the slide that showed Stop the Shouting by George Williams. So it was very interesting to think about under what's the problem of getting repeat commands from different people. And I know we talked about, so what's the solve there? But did I hear you mention that it's also directing one person at the site and scene who will be the lead communicator? Can you talk through that a little bit?
Madam Mayor and Councilmember Corliss, thank you for that question. We've actually seen this situation recently in a incident that we reviewed within the last month. Yes, we have seen incidents where you will have multiple officers all yelling different commands at the same time. It's very chaotic. And like I said, it's understandable. We are in very high risk, dynamic situations. And I think that is an instinctual thing to do. what we are trying to really encourage training to focus on is having that designated communicator and the discipline by all the other officers to not say anything. So this incident that we recently reviewed, there were multiple officers on scene. It was a high-risk situation. There was a fair number of members of the public also in the vicinity. And the officers showed up, the suspect came near, and the officers all started to yell. The designated communicator immediately and forcefully, I can't remember the exact words, but essentially, I'm on communication. Everybody else listened and said nothing. And he was able to successfully communicate not only to the involved individual, but to the other involved officers, and the individual is taken into custody safely. It makes a difference.
Yeah, that's great. I can see how that could make a big difference when you're on scene.
Mm-hmm.
A couple other questions. One is, I know there's a lot of opportunities for training for different things. Have we looked at doing any cross training with other organizations, police organizations here, Ada County, Meridian Police Department? Has that happened today?
Madam Mayor and Council Member Corliss, I do not know the answer to that, but I do know somebody who's here who could answer that if you would like.
Yeah, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Chief Dennison, would you mind?
Welcome, Chief.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Corliss. So BPD does do training with other agencies, specifically in crisis intervention training. That is an Ada County program that not only BPD participates with, but we participate with the other agencies. We also do cross training for active shooter, active killer events with other departments. So we're constantly looking at ways we can collaborate with other agencies in Treasure Valley to make sure we're providing the best service we can.
Thank you very much, Chief Dennison. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, a couple questions. Thank you so much for the presentation. Excellent job. I'm struck by a couple of things, and I want to clarify this for the public, because what I'm seeing and hearing from you is a data-driven analysis of what happens in these really, really tough situations, and then the opportunity to take what we've learned and have that guide the training, which I think is something that we don't always hear about. This stop the shouting is a very interesting comment or concept for me. I wish I would have had this as a child, frankly. A lot of shouting in our home. But I'm curious, I'd like to hear from the chief particularly about, is this something that is happening nationwide? How did you come up with this idea specifically? Every TV, every movie, everything, every media show has people screaming in these kind of situations. And so it's a very different tactic. And I'd just like to get some more context about if this is something that's happening nationwide and what it is that prompted you specifically to say, okay, we're going to look up this tactic, George Williams, stop the shouting. I like some more context on it.
Madam Mayor and Councilmember Willits, thank you for the question. This is a really important aspect of policing. We, meaning OPA, has been having conversations since I started with BPD on the necessity for effective communication. That is, the words you use, the tone you use, the cadence, the repetition, all of it. Individuals are stressed when they come in contact with police. And so you can imagine, like we talked about, it increases that chaotic thinking. Well, if an officer comes in, particularly multiple officers come in, it becomes more chaotic. So our goal is to show up, have a secure scene, slow it all down, and take the patience it requires to peacefully resolve a situation and take an individual into custody if necessary. So we've been having this conversation, and then the Chief Nia from the Office of Internal Affairs, somebody on his team found this article and they shared it with us, and it was just a light bulb moment. I thought, yes, somebody took the time to write this all up, and it really resonated with us. So this is something that I saw firsthand when we went to the scenario-based training recently. And it was something that was expected by the trainers. If it didn't happen, the debrief addressed it, and then they would run another scenario. And you could immediately see the change in the communication from just practicing it. Those repetitions are really important. So this is definitely something that we are looking for and that BPD is training and reinforcing. But it takes time to change the way you police when you've been doing it for years. And it just requires discipline because you're in a high risk dynamic situation. So your instinct is to react as opposed to slowing it down and holding your role. If I'm on lethal, I should not be yelling at the involved individual. If I'm on less lethal, I should not be yelling. You should just be listening and communicating. If you would like to hear from Chief Dennison, I'm happy to invite him back up on this too.
Yeah, thank you. I really would.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Willits. Yes, we are seeing this as a national trend. So if you go back even when I started a little over 21 years ago in policing, the training was ask them, tell them, make them. And it was give loud commands. So the suspect and everybody around you knows you're giving commands for somebody to do something in case of force is used, that they could be witness to the fact that we're providing that. What we've seen is a national trend moving away from just that low level tactic and looking at an effective communication. So it is designating specific people to have that communications training, an entire department in crisis intervention training, looking at programs that came from the Police Executive Research Forum, like integrating communication, assessment and tactics to really drive what we're doing in these situations to give officers a better chance to communicate with people. Because we have to understand the suspect a lot of times will be having an amygdala response. It's that flight or flight. And officers are sometimes having the exact same thing. It's high stress, it's intense. And what we want to do is engage that prefrontal cortex for not only the officers, but for the suspect to get that higher level thinking in play and hopefully resolve situations. So this is something we're seeing across the trend, as a trend across the nation. And BPD, I would say, is at the very front of this as well.
Thank you. That's very insightful. Appreciate it.
It looks like that's it for now. I want to thank the three of you for all that went into what you presented today, because it's been a year's worth of work, a lot of work. And also to thank the department for your collaboration and willingness to listen, learn, and work together to address some of the recommendations that have been made, so we can continue to provide great service to our residents. So thanks, everybody. Wonderful presentation today. Great information. I think that you've got another piece that you're probably do you have more to talk about in terms of what's next?
Oh, Madam Mayor, we did get through our priorities for fiscal year 2026.
Okay, great.
So that's it.
And I will take this as a nod off to recommend your recommendations and priorities for the year.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, council members. Pleasure to see you. Thank you for your time and attention.
We will take a 15-minute break and then be back for the updates to the modern zoning code. Thanks, everybody. We're all getting back together. Deanna, welcome. This is a presentation on a review of the modern zoning code 1 year in, which was implementation date 1 year in was December of last year. So team has put together the data that we have, feedback that we've received, and some recommendations for changes. I want to thank Deanna and the team that spent years working on this modern zoning code for us, and then the whole PDS team that has spent the time now taking feedback from folks and proposing how the public engagement that we have moving forward, so that we can continue to iterate on this and stand true to one of our values, which is there's nothing that we can't do better. Just before Deanna kicks off, I was recently at a board meeting of the Idaho Association of Commerce and Industry, IACI, and we were talking about housing as one of the key drivers of economic development and opportunity. And there was a lot of interest in what we've done with the zoning code. And I see this as an opportunity to look at the data that we've been able to receive, take in the feedback that we've received, and then some proposed, you've seen in the memo and you'll hear today, some changes that we can make while we continue to perfect the process so that we can keep at our goal of ensuring that there's a market-based approach and certainty as well as availability, excuse me, for land related to our goal of ensuring that everybody that works in Boise is able to afford to live in Boise. So Deanna, welcome. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Mayor, council members. Today I'll be presenting a review of the first year of the zoning code. The adoption of the zoning code represented a milestone in the city's efforts to implement Blueprint Boise, as well as to modernize our development processes. Today, I'll be covering all things zoning code through several sections. The first is I'll be providing some background about the code rewrite process. Then we'll dive into a review of the data, sticking high level at first, and then going into specific topics as they relate to citywide goals. I'll give a highlight of some other evaluation efforts that we're working on, as well as other zoning related projects. And then I'll cover a proposed approach to amendments to the zoning code. The purpose of today's presentation is to affirm direction on next steps for zoning ordinance amendments. As many of you were a part of the adoption process of the zoning code, I'll give just a high level of our goals. We really wanted to center on creating a variety of housing options for all Boiseans, ensuring that we're receiving a predictable and sustainable development pattern, creating a city that actually offers transportation options for Boiseans, as well as supporting a healthy environment and community. As also some of you may remember, we had a very lengthy but deliberate adoption process of the code. And this is a process that I'll talk more about later in the presentation, but it is to be intentional about changing the code. And with several public hearings, the code went into effect, several public hearings. The code was adopted in June of 2023 with an effective date of December 1st, 2023. More background, but I'm going to promise that I'll try not to use too much jargon as we go through the data, but it is hard with planning related topics. So just some background on common planning terms. If I say PLN, which I'm going to try not to say, that is what we shorthand call a planning project. It's basically the abbreviation you get when you submit something into our online system.
What does PLN stand for?
Planning project.
Oh, plun. Okay.
It's like
it's like a license plate.
Yeah.
Okay,
it's the code that the computer gives you. But unfortunately is in our vocabulary now all the time. If I say IDR, I understand it means interdepartmental review, which is the collaborative process in which we bring other agencies, other departments to review a project together and provide feedback. P&Z is the Planning and Zoning Commission. And then, of course, the famous ADU, which is accessory dwelling unit. This is just a high level workflow diagram, but really goes to show how much planning and development touches a project from idea to occupancy. As I'm going through the presentation, I'll largely be focusing on information coming from the first two sections, which is the pre-submittal process and the planning review process. Some more background. With all things data, I got to give a little bit of qualifications. So all of the data you're seeing today, unless otherwise noted, is from the first full year of the zoning code. So December 1st to November 30th, 2024. We're going to be including only approved planning projects. As you saw on that previous slide, things do take a while to move through the process. So we're going to be seeing things that have received that approved. So numbers may look different as you see them later on once projects get approved. We'll also, unless otherwise noted, we'll be excluding information from our specific plans, which is Harris Ranch, Barber Valley, and Syringa Valley, just because those were not impacted by the changes to the code. And these numbers may change in the future as we improve data quality. And also applicants can always come back and adjust their approval. So numbers may change as we look at this in the future. So with that, we'll move into our year one data. I first want to acknowledge the work of a team of 30 talented staff planners. This data is a summary of all the work that they have done, touching individual projects, working with customers where they're at to ensure that we're getting the best we're getting the best development for our city. So just a huge amount of work and a huge thank you to all of that staff. This represents their efforts. So when we look at that year, kind of moving along that, we see significant volume, 17,000 front desk calls, almost 1,000 applications submitted, resulting in nearly 600 approved projects. We're also interfacing with the community. Something new with the zoning code update was creating a development tracker, which I hope many of you have seen, which online, any new project is posted to that website. We have over 300 subscriptions, which means 300 people are receiving a weekly email of those of all new projects across the city, but 42,000 visits in that development tracker in 1 year. So this is providing a really great resource to our community. We also have a lot of impact. We've approved just in the new zoning code over 1,000 units. And one thing I like to see, and I'll say it again, we have almost 5 miles of new sidewalk built through the process. Diving deeper into our housing supply information, you're going to see that in this first year, we have in 2024, nearly 1,800 or over 1,800 units were entitled, with 1,000 of those units being through the new zoning code. That's again, of course, because the legacy code continued through 2024. So you see those numbers represented. We're also showing some information just for comparison about building permits. We had some record years during the COVID period. So we're kind of seeing a leveling off of those peaks. Additionally, consistent with our goals within the zoning code, we're seeing a lot of our we're seeing many of our units being located within the MX3, which is the mixed use active zones, and R3, which is our urban residential. And this is, again, consistent with wanting to put new housing in areas where we can accommodate that.
Madam Mayor.
Yeah.
Dana, could you go back one slide? Could you talk about, are there any entitlements or any housing by right that might fall out of the scope of some of this, like that we may have legalized and we're just not capturing it here?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Nash, that's a good question. I think on the top graph, if we're talking about planning, we may not be seeing all of the single family homes getting planning approval, because if you've already subdivided, often you can go straight to building permits for a single family home. We do touch through the planning review process many other projects. Everything that is getting constructed does have to have a building permit unless they're not doing it right. So that would be captured in the building permits.
Thank you.
Just one other thing to say about this slide. You'll see that we have that continued build out of the specific plans, Harris Ranch and Syringa Valley. For the rest of the presentation, those will be excluded, but we are seeing housing within those areas. Regarding review authority, we're seeing about 36% of applications being approved administratively and over half of them going through the Design Review Commission. This represents a good balance between the stated goals of the code, which was to provide more administrative review or streamlined approval for smaller scale projects, but still giving some sort of design oversight for those larger projects. Additionally, in the future, we may see more projects being approved at City Council, because those would be through the subdivision process, and those have just taken longer. So maybe within the next couple of months, some of those will be moving through Council. Another key goal of the zoning code was to increase the diversity or the variety of housing across our city. This first year, we saw a majority of that housing being located in large multifamily projects. However, when you look at the next two over, which is small multifamily and neighborhood scale, that adds up to about 15%, which is units between 3 and 50. Also, what is notable is ADUs, and we'll talk more about this. This kind of becomes the star of the zoning code. We're seeing a large number of ADUs approved, similar to what is approved in single family. As I mentioned in response to Council President Nash's questions, some single family homes may not be looked at through planning because they may be going straight to building permits. So that number could be higher.
Madam Mayor. Hi, Deanna. Thank you so much for all this great info. I have a couple of questions here. Do you know, even anecdotally, how these numbers might compare to previous trends?
Council or Madam Mayor, Councilmember Stead. I would say I don't have great data on that. I could say that the more neighborhood scale is larger than past because those have been not permitted previously. So that's a new addition. Additionally, I mean, townhouse and duplex have always been kind of low, and maybe some of that demand in the duplex actually got shifted to the neighborhood scale because now they can do a triplex or a fourplex. So we may be seeing that there.
One more question, Madam Mayor, on this. So I remember in my own conversations with folks when the code was going through, it was clear to me that it seemed like the most feasible financially for a lot of folks would be the duplex step rather than a tri or quad. And that number still looks so low to me. Is there anything that we're doing to evaluate that or figure out how we can see more of those duplexes going forward?
Madam Mayor, Council member, I think that we could always improve on that. We have some goals around design and seeing if we're being overly regulatory with our design requirements. So we're hoping to kind of kick off some projects where we explore that more.
Is there, Madam Mayor, sorry, last thing, is there any timeline for those? Because I know that if we continue to review this annually, there was probably another review right on the heels of this one as far as planning goes. But do you have any timeline in mind? I know that there's also a lot of work being done right now with evaluating incentives and things like that. Do you know any next steps on those timelines for recommendations?
Yes. So the incentives, we hope to come back with you with more information about that in the spring. So, and I have a whole slide about the evaluation and I'll get into that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor. Deanna, on the same note on duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, while I was here at the tail end of modern zoning code, wasn't here kind of at the beginning. And I think one of my goals as through not any present round of edits, but future rounds of edits is trying to establish some level of parity, regulatory parity between single family homes and a duplex or a triplex and a fourplex as far as what hoops they have to jump through the planning process. Could you speak to what goals we had around that with the modern zoning code and how you might be looking at that going forward?
Madam Mayor, Council President Nash. Yes, I think that we definitely did take that approach as much as possible. We did, as I've talked about, we don't currently through most single family homes are not receiving planning approval because they go straight to building permit. So that was something we had to balance with duplex, triplex, fourplexes about if we put regulations on duplex, triplex, fourplex, and we want to apply the same regulation to single family, how does that change the process? Given all of that, though, we reduced parking for all of those plex options. So they have the same parking requirement as a single family home, which is 1 per unit. We have taken a similar approach as regard to landscaping. So we have some things in the code that we did try to treat things that were under 5 units more similar to a single family home, though they're not identical. And that's something we could always continue to evaluate and adjust.
Madam Mayor, since we stopped here, I just have 2 quick questions. Deanna, thank you very much for this information. It's so exciting to see, especially for the accessory dwelling units, those numbers increasing. We talked initially about one of our goals is to make sure people who live in Boise or who work in Boise can live in Boise. Do we have a baseline or information of how many people who work in Boise live in Boise?
I'll jump in here. We do have economic data on the number of jobs. We have data on where people live and the number of homes we need, but that's not something that Deanna was prepared to bring.
Yeah,
She's
no, that's
talking
fine.
about the kind of data related to the zoning code usage.
I just want to make sure we had a baseline, so we look at the measure. And just one final question on ADUs. On the application for those, do we note whether or not that they'll be used as a home or a short-term rental?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Corliss, I don't have that current data. That's not something that we're asking at zoning review, though it is something that we could work with the clerk on. All right, and going more into accessory dwelling units. So as we talk about, and we've talked about often, this kind of stole the show of the first year in the zoning code. This graph does a great job. We do have good trends on previous years of ADUs. So we were able to show that when looking at the past 5-year average, we have 113% increase in ADUs just this year. And this could be for many reasons. One thing that we're kind of tracking is that through the zoning code rewrite, we removed parking requirements, increased the maximum size, as well as removing the owner occupancy requirement. So any of these could have been influencing this outcome.
Deanna, sorry, Madam Mayor, one quick question. To Councilmember Corliss's point, I think it would be really interesting to ask for some like voluntary data around the use, whether it would be for ADUs, whether they'll be personal use or short-term rental expectations, or available on the open market for long-term rentals.
Thank you. Madam Mayor, yeah, while you're talking about ADUs, I am curious, do we have any understanding of how HOA covenants are preventing folks who want to do ADUs from doing them? I know that the legislature's worked on that a little bit, but there's some muddy waters there.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Willits, I don't have any currently with me other than probably the same anecdotal information that you've heard. There's also just something that is, some of the newer subdivisions that may be in a HOA, that lot patterning might be challenging, and there are rules on where it could be placed and things like that. So I don't have any hard data with me on that.
Madam Mayor, this question may be maybe beyond a little bit that issue, but just curious, when the city, maybe understanding you can enlighten us, when the city approves a new subdivision, do we approve their initial covenants as a city? Okay. So that's independent.
Okay, good. All right. Let me see. I was on this slide. Okay. So when we're looking at where those accessory dwelling units are located, largely they're in our R1C, which is the traditional residential zone. This is kind of to be expected. This represents 25% of the land area in the city. And then when we look at where that is geographically, looking at Blueprint Boise, primarily they're in the north and east ends, which is consistent with past trends. However, what is exciting, we're seeing kind of more geographic dispersal. So the Central Bench, West Bench, and Southeast have a greater share than they have historically. Of course, with the zoning code, we wanted to have a strategy to incentivize developers providing deed restricted affordable housing and or offering sustainable building practices. So when we look at the success of our housing incentives, it's very early to tell. And as we mentioned, we are conducting an evaluation of this to really look underneath the hood and make sure that what we're requiring or what we're offering as an incentive pencils for developers. And we do plan to bring that information back to you in the spring. But just looking at what has happened in the last year, we've had 3 projects approved, resulting in 3 affordable units. Since December, though, so since we pulled that data, we had a larger project come through that did use one of our affordability incentives. And then we have 7 more in review. This is something where time really is needed to see this. These are big projects that are complicated, that require people coming in with an idea and saying, hey, can you deed restrict any of these? And then they got to come back, think about it. So I think with more time, we might have some more information, and coupled with our economic evaluation, that will really give us a more robust picture of this. Looking at the sustainability projects, we've had 3 projects approved, however, resulting in a much larger number, 398 units, which 2 of those were large multifamily projects. So that's why the numbers are so large. And then 1 fourplex used the sustainability incentive. And then we have 2 projects that are in review where they're considering it into the future.
Madam Mayor, Deanna, thank you for this. This is very helpful, and thank you for the feedback you got into our staff about the specifics on this. Councilmember Stead and I met with the individuals that are doing that study, and it was very enlightening. I think, I mean, I don't want to speak for all of council, but I think when we were debating this, the affordability and sustainability incentives, I was kind of like tunnel vision on how they have applied to threeplexes and fourplexes, not on multifamily. It seems like they've been more useful in creating density bonuses, height exceptions, and so forth for large multifamily. And it seems like we have fewer projects using the threeplex, the triplex, and fourplex. Just putting that out there, that I would be really interested in recommendations from PDS in the future when we get that report back on how this might be working differently for multifamily than it is for triplexes and fourplexes, because really want to see more development like that on the same way that we've seen the ADU development, and want to see how that might be affecting it. So
Thank you.
Good.
I'm ready. All right. So another key part of the zoning code was to focus development in areas where we have planned public investment. This map may be familiar from the adoption process, but we wanted to really center our development in those areas where our community believes these are the best places for more and more intense housing. So downtown, along our best-in-class transit routes, activity centers as identified in Blueprint Boise, and our mixed-use zones. So when we start to look at all of the housing that was approved, about 23% of those were located within the downtown planning area. And I'm going to do a series of maps, so just more things will come on the map. And then we looked at within a walking distance to our best-in-class transit routes, which was about 11%, kind of additive to that 20% in downtown. And then a smaller 34 units were approved within a quarter mile of an activity center. And then lastly, looking at kind of all of the other mixed use zones, another 20% were within those areas. So when we look at our key areas, these are when we talked to the community, they said, let's focus development in areas that have goods, jobs, services, and infrastructure. We see nearly 60% of the units being located in one of these areas. However, while we all know housing is incredibly important, but as we are building out the areas, we really want to have a balance between housing and then goods, services, places to go near where the housing is located. So as you can see on this table, we added another column that talks to the non-residential permitted in each of these areas. So you kind of see the different thousands of square feet approved. So nearly having 500,000 square feet of non-residential being located in any of these areas. We also want to be very intentional about where new housing is being located, especially with regard to emergency services. So when we look at our fire response area, 96% of all units were located within that area. Additionally, we want to align with other citywide goals and efforts. So making sure that as we're advancing one goal in the city, we're supporting that with our development pattern. So 95% of all units were within a 10-minute walk to a park. And what you'll see, that little gap in the West Bench where there are some units that weren't within a 10-minute walk of a park, the city recently purchased a park to go right there. So that will capture even more units. On the flip side of this, in the zoning code, and in a lot of our long range planning, we call out sensitive lands where we want to have careful consideration about where new development is being located. These are what we call our sensitive land overlays, the airport influence area, our hillside and wildland urban interface overlay, as well as the floodplain. So when we look at all of these sensitive lands, about a quarter of new units were located in them, with kind of the most being within the floodplain, which is one multifamily project. What's good to know about the floodplain developments is we have a lot of regulations around how development can occur in those areas, so that we're being really intentional and protecting that development as it gets built there. Keeping up with the line of wanting to be aligned with other citywide goals, we really look at adding to the using development as a way to add to our tree canopy. So we added 717 new trees and received about $42,000 into the tree mitigation fund, which is enough to fund 140 new trees. We also want to support our efforts to be carbon neutral. So looking at electric vehicle parking as a way to support that. We require 3 different types of EV parking or EV infrastructure for things to be EV capable, which is laying down the conduit, EV ready, which is creating the outlet, and then EV installed, which is providing the charger. Those are the numbers for the parking added in each of those areas. Not all projects require an EV parking spot, but for the residential projects, typically a multifamily project that does require EV parking, we're seeing that when we average it out, it's about 1 EV installed parking spot per every 6 units. And just to look on the other side, in our climate action roadmap, we have goals around electrical vehicle ownership, and we're hoping that by 2030, we have 40% of households with an EV.
Madam Mayor, quick question, Deanna, on the trees, actually on the last slide. Can you remind us, please, what the tree mitigation fund is? I mean, obviously it's used for trees, but where are those trees planted? Are they planted in the neighborhoods that are impacted by that specific development or elsewhere?
Madam Mayor, Council Member, I'm going to be honest, I think I have an idea, but I'm not 100% sure, and I don't want to say the wrong thing.
Yeah, you can get back to us.
Okay.
Thank you.
We also saw rewriting the zoning code as an option to really connect land use and transportation. So when we look at proximity to transit, we're seeing 82% of all new development within a quarter mile of a bus stop. This is beyond just the best in class. We also see significant location of new units near a pathway identified in the pathway master plan, so 76% of units. We also have about a quarter mile helping to actually contribute to that pathway plan. So a variety between where we are getting an easement for a future pathway, or we're actually requiring the development to build the pathway. And then this is an impressive stat on our end, but nearly 5 miles of new sidewalk built with development. We heard through the rewrite process that safe and secure bike parking was very important to our residents. So we're seeing through those developments that require bike parking, we have nearly 1,200 new spots with a mixture of long-term and short-term. When we were able to sort out just the residential projects that require bike parking, it's on average of 1.5 bike parking spots per unit. Generally, vehicle parking saw kind of small adjustments through the code. And we've received 4 requests for parking reductions. And then when we look to really track those changes to the parking requirements, we looked at some specific residential projects that were impacted by fewer parking requirements. So like we had said, duplex, triplex, fourplex, we in the zoning code rewrite reduced that parking requirement. And 6 projects took advantage of those reduced parking requirements. However, 11 projects still provided more than was required. So I think this shows a good option of saying we're allowing people to decide what's best for them. Additionally, through the code, we wanted to create opportunities for businesses and ways for residents to participate in our local economy. So we see good uptake of small scale retail within our small scale retail cafes, neighborhood scale. So 2 neighborhood cafes, 18 small retail spaces, 10 medium-sized retail spaces. And these are going to be, the neighborhood cafes are actually located in our residential areas, where some of that small and medium is in our mixed use zones. Additionally, we really, this has been an emphasis of the city for a long time, is supporting our community through daycare. We saw 30 new daycares, a large number of them being home occupations. And this is probably aligned with a lot of the mayor's efforts to reduce barriers for daycare. And we also see some other home occupations getting approved, things like salons, different things, but 3 there, but not all home occupations require a permit. So there still may be more than this. And then looking at our industrial, really wanting to have a balanced land use portfolio. We have about 300,000 square feet of industrial, and a little bit over half of that was the Micron expansion.
Deanna, while you take a breath, Madam Mayor, I just want to say I'm really excited to see these numbers on the in-home daycares. I know this is a big priority for, several of us on the council and the mayor, and thank you for pointing it out. And if you see other things through the permitting process, if that continues to stay with the city that we can do, we'd love that feedback.
Thank you. So this is going to wrap up the data part. So I'm happy to answer any other questions on this, or we can continue to move through the next section.
Madam Mayor, I've got a couple of questions about the data. There's some numbers in here that are both exciting. There's some numbers that are a little bit smaller. I try to remind myself that as applications came through us this last year, more than half of them, we were reminding ourselves that this was a legacy, zoning code project. And so, all things considered, there's some other data that's there. One of the things that I think that I had hoped and other council members had hoped to see is that it would be easier to create more diverse and affordable units because the application process would be easier as well. And I'm wondering if we have any data at this point that shows from the time that somebody hits enter and you have a new PLN in your system to the time that it actually gets either approved or built, if we know if the pace is moving faster. And again, I recognize that this is the first year, there's some kinks, we're kind of operating off of 2 zoning codes, but if you could speak a little bit to, is the application process moving quicker on some of the projects that we want to see?
Madam Mayor and Councilmember Halliburton, I don't have any of that information in front of me. We can follow up with that. I know we are trying to track that, but as you perfectly stated, we were doing 2 codes for a while. We were adopting a brand new code. So things definitely have evolved. So averages might not indicate current trends that we're seeing. And that's why, again, time is really important as we're moving forward and getting better at a new code.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think that
I'd say that I just want to lift up that key in that is that we are measuring it because we do want to be able to see if it's working or what needs to be tweaked.
Perfect. Yeah, wonderful. I think that that's one of the things when I hear some of my fellow council members' comments about, are we seeing these triplexes or these duplexes, or are we seeing affordable units being built in only our multi-unit stuff? And my guess is it's probably really expensive to do a lot of these things. And one of the expensive parts is the time that it takes and navigating a new zoning code. And my hope is that the process is easier for the staff, easier for the applicants, and certainly, it'd be nice if it's easier for council as well, but we'll do what we need to do. But for the staff and the applicants, like that's the streamlined process. So if we can figure out, again, Madam Mayor, thank you for letting us know that those numbers were coming. If there's ways we can make that process easier and we can see what the timeline difference is, I think that's where I'm trying to get. Thank you.
Madam Mayor. Thank you so much, Deanna. 2 comments, and one relates to what Councilmember Halliburton just said in terms of giving us data about turnaround time. And we talked about this last year, that there have been states that have mandated what that would be. And so I think it will be really important for us as a city to be able to show what that turnaround time is. And the states have done that because they've wanted to reduce costs, because in an inflationary market, time is money. So I would plead that we get that sooner than later so that we can be able to tell our story from the Boise perspective. And then second of all, and I referenced this first knowing that this is a hard thing to ask, but I know that Councilmember Halliburton and I both were curious about what's not getting built that we want to have built, or what's getting denied and going somewhere else potentially. I don't know how we capture that, but I think that's an important conversation, which is we have statistics here about what's getting built, but I'm very curious about what people are giving up on and going somewhere else or just not building. And again, I caveat that with, I know that you're not a crystal ball.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Willett, thank you. That's a good point. And I think there's maybe some things we could think about. We're looking at projects that don't make it through the approval process in our data, as well as our current evaluation, kind of these other evaluation efforts, maybe more qualitative interviews with people trying to build things that chose not to.
Madam Mayor, Deanna, one more question for me. I know that speaking of things that we want to know, are trying to encourage folks to build what we'd like to see. Adaptive reuse is on my mind a lot as something that we'd love to see more of. And I know that you had mentioned that we have some or it's an easier process than it used to be for that. I would love that to be one of our trackable data points. And I understand if it's not cumulative enough at this point to include it, but would love that in future presentations if that's something that we could address.
Happy to. All right, so moving through our other evaluation efforts, as I think we've all talked about, that data provided great insights into the volume and some of that initial impact, but it is early and we want to take a kind of continued evaluation, kind of an approach to, there's nothing we can't do better. So let's continue to evaluate this as we move forward. So with that, we're working in partnership with the new Department of Organizational Effectiveness to have a robust evaluation process that may span multiple years, but it's a kind of giving us the best way to really look at the success of the zoning code through multiple different angles. So right now we actually have live a post-application process survey, and we're conducting interviews. So every applicant who goes through the process gets prompted with an automatic email that says, will you please take this survey? They can take the survey about their experience, and then they can check, I would be happy to talk to staff for an additional interview. So we're going through that process right now, and we hope to report some of those findings back to you in the spring. In addition, and I know several of you have been involved in this, we had hired a consultant to help us do an economic evaluation of the housing incentive. So looking under the hood, looking at pro formas, what are we offering? Is it enough to make it pencil for a developer to do affordable housing or to do sustainable housing? In addition, we're working with the Idaho Policy Institute at Boise State to do a long-term comparative housing study. So this is something that may take multiple years. We're gathering data, but looking at, and this is above my math skills, but looking at kind of holding things constant or controlling for different variables, what would have happened if the city never changed its zoning code as related to housing supply, and what are we seeing now? This is something that does require a lot of data to be able to make that comparison and kind of weathering through different markets. So we'll get more information as that advances. And then I think this could help answer a lot of the questions around timeline and more often checking in. We are planning to, now that we have kind of this baseline data, publish an online zoning dashboard. So you'll be able to look at that in real time. In addition, my team, and a lot of great work on members of my team, helping to advance other projects that help support successful implementation of the code. So we right now have published a neighborhood scale incentives design guide. So this is really the nod to the success of the zoning code, is to get more of that neighborhood scale housing. So we help to create a design guide to make it easier for builders who aren't typically used to building a fourplex, or how can they look at a conventional lot and configure a fourplex there. So we have a lot of information, and we worked with a local architect to make that design guide. Also, I know some of the council members have been a part of this. We're producing an illustrated zoning code. So the average resident can pick this up and understand the story of the zoning code. We did a lot of conversation about the values of the zoning code and what we're hoping to achieve with this new code. And the illustrated zoning code kind of memorializes that and makes it more accessible for our residents. Through the summer and fall, we hope to launch a couple new projects. So a neighborhood scale housing design competition. So can we engage and activate the design community to think about building triplexes, fourplexes, small multifamily within our residential neighborhoods? And can we get high quality designs that are actually Boise specific? And then we all love ADUs, and how can we reduce barriers, make it more accessible for all of our areas? So hoping to create some pre-approved ADU plans where there's maybe 2 to 3 options. We're still kind of noodling what this will look like, where it's already pre-approved. You don't have to, we'll speed it up. You'll have a planning checklist and then a pre-approved building permits. And so more to come on all of this, and we hope to bring you along as we're going through these processes.
Madam Mayor, Deanna, this kind of falls here. Recently, I sat down with a professional to understand there's some vacant property near me, several parcels. And I was trying to understand, like, under the modern zoning code, what's the highest and best use of this property, and how could we get the most out of this? And what became very clear to me is that sometimes our intentions with the zoning code can be frustrated by an ACHD policy, or maybe it's a fire restriction that we didn't consider in the zoning code, where I might have like an acre next to me, but we can only put 3 houses instead of 20. And one of the things that I think council is interested in is better understanding where maybe interagency how we can have better uniformity when it comes to maybe like we could fit a triplex there if we could do 3 ACHD curb cuts. But instead we just get one house out of it. Or maybe there is some flexibility in a fire policy to get 20 units instead of 2. How is PDS thinking about the goals of the modern zoning code when it comes to like other agencies' policies that might affect those goals?
Madam Mayor and Council President Nash, I think that is something that we're always tracking to, wanting to balance. I mean, we work in very close collaboration, that interdepartmental review IDR. We meet with ACHD, the fire department, about specific projects and get around the table and talk and try to triage any problems that may come. I mean, life and safety is something that as planners, we really uphold, and we want to make sure that we're designing safe products for our community. But I think, given some examples, looking at it and figuring out where those barriers are, and again, trying to always improve. I think we could kind of identify if we have any conflicting policies where there's any flexibility to still maintain life and safety, but also advance some of the housing related goals of the zoning code.
Madam Mayor, just to piggyback off of that, I think one of the things that would be very interesting to me is, looking at our international building codes. A lot of cities are doing this where they're looking at how things have changed over the decades and how we can build safe single stair developments. So 4 to 6 stories with a single stair, and kind of looking at how, what those cities are looking at, how building designs, materials have changed to be able to provide health and provide another opportunity for a lot of these smaller parcels to be able to get into the game without having to get your arms around 4 of them, so you can have a double loaded corridor, bigger apartment type building. And so I think that's something I'd be really interested in seeing what the planning team, along with other agencies, might be able to think about.
Madam Mayor and Councilmember Morales, I think that's a great point. It really highlights that infill really takes a lot of thought and care to get infill done right. And it's kind of to that workflow diagram, everything from idea to occupancy, and PDS beyond just our planning team, but it's a full department and then other departments, making sure we're all on board with that and aligned.
Madam Mayor. Oh. Okay, Madam Mayor, thanks. Deanna, thank you very much. And thank you for taking all of our questions today. I'm thinking about the ADU plans, and I think it's a fantastic idea for this fall. If in all your free time. It may be helpful to also at some point in time develop a checklist for those who want to modify a garage space, and just maybe what they need to consider if they're going to change that into an ADU. I think would also be helpful, and maybe we look to engage at some type of sharing this out to community, right? Having courses or classes on, hey, you want to build an ADU. So, thank you.
Great idea.
Deanna, do you have more slides? Okay, let's do that.
And the next couple of slides are more about next steps and some nuts and bolts. So we'll get through that. Okay. So where we're at. So as promised to the community, we would come back with a plan to how we have looked at the code and a plan to amend the zoning code into the future. Here is, I had to create its own slide for this jargon because I'm going to say ZOA a lot, which is a zoning ordinance amendment, because that's a mouthful. But it's important to recognize that a zoning ordinance amendment, when I'm saying this as a ZOA, is the formal process to amend the zoning code. And this formal process involves staff submitting an application, so a ZOA application, and then that amendment is going to go through planning and zoning public hearing, city council public hearing, and the code goes into effect. This is the same process that we had to take with the adoption of the zoning code. So when we're talking about amendments, it's going to be going through this same process. And so here is a fun graphic of how we're kind of proposing to approach amendments to the code. So we look at it kind of from engagement, data, testing, evaluation. These are all things that have been occurring in this first year of the code. We're always collecting data as planners. We're always testing it. When someone calls us up and says, I want to build a triplex, and we're leafing through the code, that's a test to, is this code doing what we want it to do? as well as some of the evaluation work I've already discussed and that we hope to do into the future. From that, our goal would be to create a work plan in which some things will pop up that are like, this is just something we need to clarify. This is something we need to fix. Other things will come forward where it's more substantive and we want to spend time around that specific policy topic. From there, that's the work plan, and we would look to you all to help us prioritize that. Some things would be, like I said, what we're going to be calling continuous improvements, which is what I included in the council memo, smaller things to just make sure that the code is efficiently operating, that we are being consistent in our interpretations, and that could be a standalone zoning ordinance amendment. Then there are other things that we really want to have a more robust community conversation that involve us looking at that specific topic. So those would be policy topic zoning ordinance amendments. This is another way to look at this kind of in a timeline fashion. So in the future, now and into the future, we hope to come to council, and the stars are where we would officially come to council and report back information around this time every year on engagement that we've done to date through the fall, any of that testing, give that review of the data yearly. From there, we would see that some things fall within that continuous improvements bucket, and that we could process that as a zoning ordinance, just trying to make the code as responsive as possible, not having roadblocks. So we need to amend the code to fix that. And then in the spring, we would come with a prioritized work plan, and we would ask for your direction to help us prioritize that and say, this should be the next topic that we explore in the spring. So if we're really interested in improving the housing incentives, as an example, that could be the number one priority. Our staff would help to prepare an ordinance amendment, and then we'd come back to you to adopt that. Okay. So giving a little bit of detail about one of our zoning ordinance amendments that we're prepared to submit, which is what we're calling the continuous improvement. As I said, these are clarifications or adjustments to technical standards. Also, what we're hoping to include in this is the tiny homes on wheels, which I think that we've gotten some of that information back to you all in a separate memo, but this is in response to the pilot project. So adding that into the code through this zoning ordinance amendment. We're tracking other things that have come up, but we're going to include those as a separate ZOA. So the appeals process and review for conditional use permits, things around the airport influence area, and then, as I said, changes to the incentives. We have a proposed schedule, so we're looking to you all to help affirm this direction. We would submit an application for this in March. We would hope to come to commission in May and then council in June. There are other things as well that we could prioritize for other zoning ordinance amendments that could be standalone and go through a separate process. So as I mentioned, we've heard and we've been, we're prepared to address in the zoning code the appeal process for conditional use permits. We came up to council in December around the airport influence area, so we could prioritize that, as well as the housing incentives when we come back in the spring to report the results of that evaluation. So next steps, we're looking for guidance on submitting zoning ordinance amendments. We've heard that the appeal process for conditional use permits would be a priority, as well as our continuous improvements. And then we hope to come back to you to report back on our evaluation with the Department of Organizational Effectiveness, including all of these things shown on the screen, as well as preparing for other topic-based zoning ordinance amendments and some general engagement around the code in the fall and the winter.
Madam Mayor.
Yeah.
Thank you, Deanna, for this thorough presentation and for the memo. Could you just quickly recap that first year edits that was contained in the memo? What kinds of things are in there? We got the red line version yesterday, which we appreciate. We'd like a little bit of time to be able to review that more in depth, but could you just give us an overview on what we can expect to be seeing in there?
Madam Mayor, Council President Nash. Yeah, so this is kind of some of the topics here are clear. Well, as staff, are some things are just clarifications where we found, on this page it says this, on this page it says something different. Let's make sure they're aligned, or you could interpret it this way or that. So we're making the interpretations more clear. Others are things that we have learned through actual applications that this maybe wasn't the intent. And we've received feedback both from the commission and from council on specific things to change. And so we've accommodated those. Some things are just to make it so it is more functional. Like we said this, but you actually need another qualifier on top of that. Or, it depends how technical you want, but you could get a reduced setback for the rear in R1C, R1B, R1A, but should we also have that reduced setback for MX zones as well? Yes, we should. And so we entered that in. So lots of different things, but that is about the types of edits.
Madam Mayor, Deanna, could you remind me, we'd like to set this up on like an annual basis for us to be looking at zoning code changes. If we did do this first year's round, when could we expect to touch the zoning code again for the next round on setting up on an annual basis?
Yes. So we would hope to come every year around this time with what we're calling the continuous improvement. So could we go a whole year? As staff, we have an Excel document. Every time we find something that we're like, is this what we say? We enter it in the Excel document. So we've been collecting some of these things that we propose to you for 9 months, ready to make the zoning ordinance amendment. So we hope to come back annually with those types of amendments. Additionally, we could also be directed to do topic-based edits. That means it wouldn't be kind of some of this smaller technical stuff, but that we want to be as accessible and transparent to the community by going through that specific zoning ordinance amendment. So for example, the housing incentives. We want to have a separate process where we understand the housing incentives and we're being deliberate about those changes so that when we have a public hearing, this is what we're talking about, the housing incentives, this is what we're proposing to change. So we could do that this summer or fall.
Madam Mayor, probably just a comment to council, and then would be interested in council's feedback on some of this. If you could go to the, yeah, that's a good slide. I would like a little bit more time to review the red line before we affirm direction on that. I think a week's time would probably be fine for us to review that. Most of the stuff I've read seems fine, but we'd just like to give council time to look at that before we affirm direction. I would say my top priority would be, which I think has been well publicized and the mayor's brought forth a proposal on, would be revising the appeal process for CUPs. I don't know what applications are in the pipeline, but am concerned about making sure that council retains its authority related to CUPs following the Supreme Court decision. So my request would be expedited while we wait on to affirm direction on the other points. As far as like broader changes to the zoning code, I don't feel prepared today to make substantive changes to that. I like the data that we're collecting and what's been presenting, and I want to be responsive to the issues that have popped up. I think one example that I think is addressed in this is some of the industrial uses and the variance we had to grant back in January. So I appreciate staff being responsive to those. I have a list of about 30 things that I'd like to consider. These are things that may need to be studied, some that may need to be implemented. It would be my expectation that council starts to build towards that and that we present that to staff in a memo that you can evaluate over the next year. And some of them you might want to study, some of them you might just agree with, and some we might need to negotiate on. But that would be my expectation, and I'd appreciate council feedback on that direction.
Just a clarifying question. So you're asking that I want to repeat what you said. You're asking that staff expedite the CUP process so they would make an application for that. And then separate from what they're proposing as changes right now, you're proposing that kind of in alignment with that schedule that was presented where in the fall, there's another check-in that council collect things in memo form to present to PDS. Okay.
Yes, and that within probably a week's time, I would be prepared to affirm direction on the year one changes.
Great. Okay. Discussion.
Madam Mayor, I'm aligned to that too. It's I did a review of, I think it's like 160 changes. But some of them are difficult to evaluate without that red line version. So I appreciate you sharing that yesterday, and we can share that out. Our staff can share that out with the rest of council too. And I look forward to spending the next few days comparing that to the changes in the red line document. And I wanted to also affirm, I guess, continued analysis on I would like to see the airport incentives, et cetera. I'm looking forward to seeing staff recommendations on those things. So I know that they're not on our plate right now, but I know they're on yours. So I just wanted to encourage the continued movement in that and appreciate that those are kind of, in the hole as far as coming up next. And I also affirm the CP to move that forward. This is one, as I served on the Planning and Zoning Commission for almost 6 years before I came to council. And we even hear it from Planning and Zoning now. There's a lot of, there's a lot of opportunities where planning and zoning is not as close to the strategy of the city, where they kind of, the term is punt it up to council, where they make a decision, but affirm on the record that they would like council's feedback on that. I can think of several projects that have come to us in the last year. And as Council President Nash stated, we don't know what's in the pipeline coming, but it's something that was, it's a process note that was made by the Supreme Court, and I think drew it to our attention in a way that we hadn't maybe recognized before. So for that, I appreciate that call out so that we're able to make that change, so that council ultimately has final decision on our projects, which I think makes a lot of sense as the higher body and also as elected officials elected by our community rather than appointed by one person. So I think that leads for a fair process and doesn't undervalue P&Z because I know that we all deeply rely on the notes that they leave us and through their record as we learn through what their expertise is on those projects.
Madam Mayor, Deanna, first of all, thank you. I know that we joked when you were going through the zoning code that you could get a PhD in less time. And I know this has been a long road for you. You've been here, from the beginning, and I really appreciate all that you've done to date to get us to this point. And thank you for presenting this. I know that for those of us that were here when we passed the zoning code, we were very interested in this continuous feedback loop, making sure that we view the zoning code as a living document, not something that we kept on a shelf for 60 years. So appreciate you so much. Also like to thank the council president and the mayor for having this discussion. I know that we had a discussion about our council priorities, about needing this information, wanting to have this public discussion, the importance of it. So really appreciate that. In terms of the process, I appreciate the next steps. I certainly have a list, not 30, but I have a list of things that I'd like to talk about and consider and dig deeper. So I'll be submitting those to our council and look forward to talking more about it. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, Deanna, thank you so much for your presentation. It does feel, there's the phrase like you're building the plane while you're flying it, but this was much better. This we have launched, and I think this project, this overall effort was doing really amazing things. Appreciate the data, kind of affirming some of that stuff. I think just want to make a comment that there was a lot of concern about the parking reduction during this process, and just having that data to show how the market actually interacts with things like that. And no business is going to not want enough parking to be able to get the business it needs, right? And so really appreciate having that data to be able to illustrate where things will get built where they make sense. Also just wanted to say that I think a lot of things that I've heard out in the community about our effort here was to increase housing. And I, like to say abundant housing. And that is kind of the big goal. And a lot of the data that we're tracking is on units, housing units. And I think probably it's probably very difficult and maybe impossible. But I think one of the things that there's a little bit of a disconnect for neighbors is how does the number of units impact the bottom line, and that is costs. And people say affordability, but not talking about just pure affordable units, talking about just everyday, what is the actual impact on someone's budget by being able to have more units. And over the next couple of years, as we get more data and maybe have a better understanding to be able to illustrate that, what percentage increase did we prevent because of the number of units coming online? And obviously, there are a lot of variables that kind of come into that, the current market and rates and things like that. But that's just one thing I've heard from neighbors is kind of how the modern zoning code had a goal to make it more affordable to live here. And is it reaching that? And trying to connect that financially for residents would be really great.
Madam Mayor, I think I'm up next. Yes, thank you for the presentation. I agree with the firm direction that Council President Nash offered, as well as the comments of the other council members. Continuous improvement is certainly one of my highest priorities. It's also an area that I don't expect to have super heavy involvement in. The continuous improvement is where I want to make sure that I trust the staff to understand the values that were created, within the modern zoning code and our comprehensive plan, and for you to be figuring out ways to make those more efficient. Certainly the changes that you've sent over needs to be something that council understands, but I'm really hoping that you all, the experts, are the ones who can recognize where those efficiencies are. What I hope doesn't happen is that we don't have a plan that's so stringent, so tight that we aren't able to be flexible in figuring out how to reach those goals, and that you all have the ability to both employ that flexibility, but also see where there needs to be some changes and to bring those forward to us. I see our opportunity really being in those larger topic areas for us to identify where those priorities are and to have those robust conversations while I'm stepping out of operations and allowing you to really be part of that day-to-day activity. It is a priority for me to make sure that we're making that as efficient as possible and that we're making it easier than it was before in the past. We certainly don't want to have it that way. But I also think that it's going to take some time for all of us to figure these out. And I'm cautioning myself from going in there and meddling too much and trying to put too many changes in place until we really know, after this has been in effect for a while, to see how it's working. So yes, I support that affirmed direction. Would love to have some extra time to look at some of those changes, but also really relying on you to be solving those problems and for us to be looking at some of the larger ones.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, Deanna, thank you again for this presentation. So much great information. I will be affirming the direction by Council President Nash. A couple of comments is this is a living document and reiterative, and it was set out to be. I want to make sure that we're also making that, getting that input from the community, right? These are the people who are impacted by our decisions here with the zoning code, and making sure we're getting the builders, we're getting our neighborhood associations and community. I'm not sure if any of these 160 take into account any feedback we've already received. I guess, does it take back feedback we've already received from the public? I guess, Deanna, would be the question.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Corliss, we have done, it's the targeted outreach, but most of it has come through a public process. So through commission meetings, council meetings, or with interactions with the members of the community who are trying to work through the code.
Great. Yeah, I hope this summer, sometime we can maybe do some more public outreach and to see so that they're involved in this process. So the ones, of course, that we're doing all this work for is our community. Yeah, I appreciate the process and making it reiterative, and we'll be providing some comments back on the changes. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Deanna. Really appreciate the feedback from council. You're good with the direction that you received today?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Thanks all very much. And our last item for our council meeting, or break before council meeting. Christine, welcome. A discussion on risk management This is in response to a goal that council has, as well as I have had, to look at where we can reduce risk and liability across the city. And you'll see quite a few department heads here, our risk team, as well as Christine, who will be presenting. Thanks.
Okay. Good morning, Mayor, members of council. Christine Miller. I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff for Public Safety and Infrastructure, and it's great to be with you today. I'm here on behalf of a large team and just want to recognize the hard work that Corey Pence and the Risk and Safety team put into this. Are some really good financial analysis by the budget team. Of course, the chiefs and directors who ultimately will own implementing all of this. And then I think I'm going to be the second person at least to give a shout out to the new organizational effectiveness department for their work in helping us develop this into actual measurable goals. So with that, wanted to start out with just a quick level set on what we are trying to do with risk and safety, and say that this is not at all unique to the city of Boise. This is something that every organization is managing. So this is not something we are in alone. And really what we are looking at doing is getting ahead of known issues, intentionally taking action to reduce harm and loss, and then being in a really good position to respond to risks as they arise, because you always get a curveball here or there. And ultimately, what we're talking about relates to our assets and our people. So as we're looking at and assessing risk and safety, we really are looking at the things that we own, like park facilities, amenities, the beautiful trees, the green belt, and then, of course, all of our buildings, sewer lines, our technology systems, but then also people. So inclusive in this are things like workers' compensation claims. So we're really looking at staff injuries, employment claims, and then, of course, as we heard more from this morning with Nicole and our OPA overview, any critical incidents our team is involved in. And I think this goes without saying, but why this matters to us. This is an underpinning of our safe and healthy community for everyone, community priority area. We also have really important goals around employee wellness, and this work supports those. And finally, fiscal responsibility. So as I said, this is not unique to the city of Boise, but we really are seeing some national trends and wanting to be attentive to this so that where we can, we are targeting long-term cost avoidance and containment in this area. Of course, we're wanting to manage as best we can within a challenging kind of national environment, and we'll talk more about that later. And then finally, really focusing on areas that are within our sphere of control and focusing our efforts around risk mitigation there. So fiscal impact. As I said, a lot of what we are reacting to is some national environment and national trends that we're seeing around risk and insurance costs. And the graph that you're looking at here is we are about in the middle, sitting here in FY25, and this graph is looking backwards 10 years and forward 10 years and applying assumptions about if we continue on the track we have been on, what would the fiscal impact be if we took no action? And so you'll see historically the city's total investment in risk and safety, so that's inclusive of like our workers' comp fund, our risk and safety fund, and our insurance costs, that used to hover just over $2 million a year or represent just a little over 1% of our budget. However, we have seen costs growing in these areas, and so we want to make sure that we are doing everything that we can to try to curve that growth curve so that we are not sitting in FY35 where those costs have escalated to a point that it's consuming something more like 5% of our total budget. And the why behind this, I think, is obvious to all of us. We would rather be putting that money to different use for our community. Seeing rising cost in this area, I don't think any of us see as a tremendous value add. So this really is in trying to direct our dollars to most impact for our community. All right, so cost drivers. There was some really great analysis done about a year ago in preparation for last year's budget build, trying to get our arms around what was driving these increased costs. And some of these are actually good news. So some of the cost drivers that we see are simply assets. So we have to insure all of our city properties. And that means when we build a new fire station, when we bring a new park online, that simply adds to our overall portfolio and we've got to insure it. So that is something that we don't see necessarily as a risk. That's actually positive for us that we're continuing to add amenities for our city, as well as needing to maintain and continue to invest in existing assets. Another driver is staff. And really, I think of staff as the people power to deliver services. So again, adding staff means we have more people that we are insuring and or that could be at risk of an injury. So again, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just reflective of growth and the great services we're offering our community. Two other drivers, somewhat beyond our control. There was some legislation passed related to first responders. One of those pieces of legislation was 2016 around presumptive illness, and another was in 2019 around post-traumatic stress injuries. And that definitely impacted how claims come back to the city, where that money is flowing. And so that's been something that we've been keeping an eye on and have been very proactive in addressing in terms of making sure that we're increasing training, doing good facility improvements, and then also investing in employee wellness. And the last one, which I alluded to earlier, on a national scale, and this again is not unique to the city of Boise or local governments, but every organization is working now just in a national environment where insurance trends are generally trending up, and we do everything we can to try to negotiate, do good things to keep those insurance costs down. But nationally, that is a trend. Insurance rates are rising. And also, unfortunately, a national trend, we're just living in a more litigious environment. And so we are seeing more claims or more lawsuits. And again, that's not unique to the city of Boise, cities in general, but is just kind of a national trend that we're seeing. So let's focus on the areas we can impact. That's exactly what this team has been doing for the past couple of months, really analyzing data, identifying where we do have risks that we think we could make improvements on, stepping up our training and prevention, so really being proactive in some of those areas. And then finally, as we have seen in, I think, the past couple of presentations today, continuing with that theme of setting goals and measuring progress. And all of that, of course, in alignment with if you're going to set a long-term strategy, and in this case, we're really trying to kind of lower that growth curve of costs, which is going to be a very long-term strategy. We don't ever expect that to dip back down, but what we're trying to do is hold where we are and try to do some cost containment and cost avoidance. Anytime that we're working on a long-term strategy like that, it's important to have annual goals so that we can see in bite-sized chunks if the changes that we're making are having the impact that we intend to. And that is why we are starting today with affirming your direction and setting some annual goals around objectives and key results. So objective area 1 is related to workers' comp, employee wellness, and that's staff injuries. So on the team's advice, we will be completing job hazard analyses for anyone who's out in the field. So for that means anybody whose day job is not sitting at a desk. So these are folks that are out and about, making sure that we understand what their risks might be. Doing annual data-driven risk reviews by department, addressing any place where we do have a facility or a workplace safety issue, and then finally making sure that we've got that good training and that all staff are completing that as we deliver it. Second objective area is around employment claims. So our HR and legal teams have been collaborating with many others to update our employee handbook, making sure that we are really clear on when and where folks should be engaging with HR to proactively get ahead of any employment issues. And then continuing to provide and enhance our guidance to all people leaders around disciplinary actions, which rarely occur, but when they do, we want them to go well. And again, finally, you're going to see this as a theme throughout these slides, making sure that all of our staff are up to date and trained as they need to be, in this case, particularly around folks who are leading people. Our third objective area is around cybersecurity. This is a topic you hear about from time to time and have really appreciated the council's attention and investment in this. This year, we're going to be adding and conducting some new tabletop trainings. We've made some significant investments, and we want to make sure that we're training to and preparing to use all of that in case of a cyber event. Annually, we do a cyber audit, and so we're making a goal to remediate anything that should pop up in that we can address. Then here's our favorite bullet, ensuring that staff are trained and up to date on all of that as well. And our last objective area is just around our general risk reduction. So when we get back and think about at a high level what we're talking about our assets and people, we want to make sure that we're inspecting and maintaining all of our assets on established schedules. And that's really in that spirit of preventative, making sure that if there are any things out there that need to be addressed, we've already got that well underway and is part of our annual major repairs and maintenance. We heard a lot this morning from OPA on analyzing critical incidents and the great work that's gone into training and making sure that as we see a trend, we're getting proactive and equipping our team with what they need to mitigate risks in those issue areas. And then finally, staying with this data-driven approach, really cross-referencing each year what the cost drivers are for the past year, and making sure that the mitigation strategies that we are talking about today are achieving the effects we hoped. And with that, happy to stand for questions.
Madam Mayor. Christine, thank you for this, and thank you to Madam Mayor and your staff for being responsive to this priority of City Council. Outside of public safety incidents, I would say my least favorite thing to deal with on council is going into an executive session and approving a new settlement or paying some judgment that we have. So my comment to staff that's here and department heads that are here is you all have priorities for your departments and needs, whether that's adding new officers, a new fire station, new park, what have you. We share those goals and we want to meet those needs that your departments have. And risk management is something that can frustrate those goals. Our budget is what it is, and the less that we're spending on these types of things, the more that we can advance your priorities and the priorities of council and of the city to have a safe and welcoming city for everyone. I know these things are boring, and I know they can be tedious, and they can require creating a culture of continuous improvement and just like generally being aware of the risks that our jobs present every day. And I would just appreciate your support in carrying forward the city's vision on this so that we can reduce our risks and reduce the amount that the times I have to go into executive session and approve another settlement. So I would appreciate everybody's support on this. And thank you for your leadership, Madam Mayor and Christine, on this.
Madam Mayor, since I've been on council, investments in wellness has been one of my largest priorities. And luckily, we've got some really great departments, our fire department, our police department, other departments that are really investing in these areas. And it's comprehensive. You know, it's physical, it's mental, it's all the different well-being that's out there. And I'm a firm believer that any investments that you make into those areas always pay off in the long run for a variety of different reasons. And so certainly supportive of that. I also want to say that like I have never seen anything stop an organization as quickly as a terrible cybersecurity attack. And I am 100% committed to not being the person that makes that happen at the city of Boise. I can't think of anything worse. And I know organizations and nonprofits who that person has been that person. And I just think that we have to make sure that we're investing in that. We have to make sure as city council members, as employees, that we take that so seriously. I know in other organizations, it's very easy to bypass some of those trainings, the different things that you have to do, but it is so important. And you do learn so much through those. So I am all on board with anything that we can do to invest with training our staff or investing in extra cybersecurity measures. From a cost perspective, I think that that's one of our biggest threats of really running these things up and having our organizational operate effectively. So 100% on board. Please let me know what I can do. And I am committed to not being the person who creates a problem in this area.
Madam Mayor. Thank you so much for the presentation. I just have a couple of comments. First is involving employee wellness. I think the city is one of the best organizations, public employers who invest so much into their employees for, like you said, physical, mental, and their entire well-being. And I appreciate the city and their commitment to continue to make that happen. Risk in looking in other areas, such as the assets, parks, and we have a lot of our department heads today. I would ask that you maybe reach out to do a survey to the people to say, hey, what other areas can we improve on to avoid risk? Because they're the ones doing the job and they're out there day to day. And maybe we can see some good ideas come our way on how we can reduce our risk as a city. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, since you looked over at me, I will make a comment. I'm really excited about the efforts that are happening, especially the tabletop exercise. Got to participate in one of those with the state of Idaho on elections. And I got to play the annoying media reporter that was hounding then Ada County Clerk Bill McGreen for answers about what was going on with the election. I just think those exercises, getting to understand really what the environment, the pressure is, are really, really important. So I think that's a great move, and just appreciate all the focus to provide that ounce of prevention. So thank you.
Thank you, Christine, very much. Appreciate it. And thanks everybody that's here as part of this as well. We will now take a break for lunch, and then we'll be back for a quick council meeting at noon.